we want to find the cosine inverse of rad 3 over 2 and the cosine inverse of negative 1/2. All right, let's do this one first here, right? So we know that the cosine inverse of radical 3 over 2, right? We know that this has to equal some angle, okay? So, of course, when we switch this around, we know that the cosine of this angle must equal radical 3 over 2. Okay, so then that begs the question next, right? Well, where does cosine equal rad 3 over 2? Okay, so we know that the cosine of pi over 6 is rad 3 over 2. And actually it turns out that the cosine of 11 pi over 6, 11 pi over 6 is also radical 3 over 2. So does that mean we have two answers here? Does that mean that cosine inverse of rad 3 over 2 equals pi over 6 and 11 pi over 6? And we can't do that because then this would not be a function, right? Okay. So how do we do this? Well, we restrict the domain. Okay, so it turns out that for cosine, right? And this is different for sine, so you make sure you remember this, right? So let's say that cosine inverse of y is equal to some value. Okay, I'm just using x and y here, right? So then, of course, cosine of x is equal to y. It turns out that in this case, now remember, this is for cosine inverse only, right? Not generally for any time you use cosine, right? But anytime you're dealing with cosine inverse, okay, it turns out that x has to be an angle in between 0 and pi, which means either x is in quadrant 1 if y is a positive number, or x is in quadrant 2 if y is a negative answer. So, okay, let's take a look. We know that cosine inverse of rad 3 over 2 is equal to either pi over 6 or 11 pi over 6, but 11 pi over 6, that's in quadrant 4, right? So we do not deal with cosine inverse in quadrant 4, right? So the final answer here is going to be pi over 6. Okay, that's our answer for that one. Okay. So similarly, we can look at this, right? Okay, cosine inverse of negative 1/2 is equal to some angle, which means then, of course, that cosine of theta is equal to negative 1/2. And once again, we know that there are two answers for this, right? We know that the cosine of 2 pi over 3 is equal to negative 1/2. And we also know that the cosine of 4 pi over 3 is also equal to negative 1/2. So once again, do we have two answers for this angle? And the answer is no. There can only be one answer. So if we investigate, okay, I know that my angle should be greater than 0 but less than pi, which means that the angle must be either in quadrant 1 or quadrant 2. Well, in this case, let's see here. This is in quadrant 3, so I'm not going to use that. So, okay, 2 pi over 3 is in quadrant 2. So this final answer here should be 2 pi over 3.